Hi, this is Marlene, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Whether you're watching a video or listening to a podcast, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. Links to videos or MP3 files can be found on miamighostchronicles.com. Go to marlenepardo.com for information on new book releases. I narrate several podcast series that can be found on major podcast platforms and can also be listened to via Alexa, Sonos, and other home systems. Look for Supernatural Storytime for scary storytelling, Nightshade Diary for classic horror and adventure stories, Stories of the Supernatural for interviews with different guests on the show. If you want to get noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird, you can visit Strange Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com or find us on Blogspot. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi everybody, it's Marlene with Stories of the Supernatural. How's everybody doing? Good, I hope. I'm doing well. Everything is good here. As you can tell by the way I'm dressed, weather's warmed up a little bit up here in North Florida. But then, you know what? It's kind of crazy. And I see this from people from all over the place. It's crazy weather. But then what's today? Thursday? By Monday or Tuesday, it's supposed to go down into the 40s at night. So it's like, well, as far as it's even nighttime. Sometimes even at night, the temperature will drop. I don't know. Crazy weather. But anyway, guys. Everything is good here. I know some of you have asked me about the planting around here. They've brought in all the different fruit trees into all the different gardens, the Walmarts, but everybody over here, this is the time, all the bulbs, whatever. So, yeah, we're doing like one of those, I learned my lesson last year. Like I said, when you live in South Florida where it's subtropical and you can plant stuff just about any time of the year, I was like watching people running around planting and, and the gardens were full and they had just brought, I was like, I didn't get it. I got it. So this year I learned. As a matter of fact, I just got 2 new peach trees, which they're budding up for me. I haven't even planted them and they're budding up for me. So I'm like, yay. And also, like I told you, we have some very old, very large live oaks out in the property. And we're going to do like a little statuary garden out there. So I'm just trying to find some nice statues to put out there. But they can't be too small because when you've got a tree that's about, 60 feet in the air above you, and it's about, like I said, people have estimated that tree's got to be between 300 and 500 years old, and its trunk, one of them, I've got 2 of them. I've got several of them, but the 2 big ones, it's like I said, even men come on the property and go up to it and hug it. But anyway, yeah, that's Marlene's preparation into springtime. So let's get on to the good part. And yes, the chickens are all fine. Before you all ask, my chickens are all fine. And like always, I've got a renegade chicken that's going into underneath one of my sheds, even though I have the lattice work all under it. I still haven't figured out how she's getting there. And you know how I know it? Because one of my dogs, he's kind of blind, but his scent is great. And when he starts circling it and he does that little yip, 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 I was like, oh God. And sure enough, she's not broody. She's laying eggs there. And you see me, I've already got a bunch of junk all along the edge of the dirt between the lattice. And then every time, the little shit's in there somewhere. And I hear, and then you see the little rooster, he stands outside and he's like, guarding, watch out. I still, at this point, I've got maybe 2 or 3 areas around it that I haven't covered up, but it's like, she's like the Houdini chicken. I don't know how she's getting in there, but anyway, yes, that's what's happening in Marlene's chicken world. Okay, now let's go on to the good part. Good part is who I have as a guest. This is a lady by the name of Livingston Martin. She is the producer and writer for the Dark Ozarks TV series. She's an attorney, author, and director of Paranormal Science Lab based in Southwest Missouri. She is a lifelong resident of Missouri and is a frequent speaker and writer on history, unexplained mysteries, and the paranormal. So help me welcome her tonight. How are you doing today, Lisa?
I'm doing good, and thank you for having me.
On the contrary, it is my pleasure. So let me ask you, uh, how did you get into this field? Childhood experience or what happened?
Well, yes and no there. I did have childhood experiences. I grew up on a farm in Southwest Missouri that was the site of Civil War battles, and we had things happen there. So I grew up knowing and experiencing things that not everyone did. So I've always been interested. But I grew up, went off to college, went off to law school, started a family. Had been away from my hometown for, oh, 18 years. And my husband and I, at the time, we moved back. We're looking for a house. And really what happened was we were looking at a house to buy, and it was turn of the century arts and craft home. We were going through it with an agent. We'd been upstairs, and uh, the agent and I had come back down, and there was a switchback staircase about 4 flights um, from the living room upstairs. And
Uh-huh.
I'm standing there talking to her, and I've got numbers in my head and everything. The last thing I'm thinking of is anything paranormal related. And my ex-husband is walking down the steps, and he'd take a step or two, and he'd stop, kind of look over his shoulder. And he kept doing this all the way down, 4 flights. And I'm thinking, what is wrong with you?
Yeah,
What's
why
going
are you
on?
stopping?
Yeah, what's going on? Um, person this age is going to think you're nuts. And he gets down to the bottom, and he kind of has this odd look on his face, and he goes, "Did you guys hear that?" And we're like, "No." And he kind of shakes it off. And then later we're down in the basement, and it's um, massive, foundation walls, and the interior room is sort of a circular room and had a couple of side rooms. And I kind of lingered in the main room. The old boiler was staying there. And I'm just kind of standing there for a second. The other two had walked off to one of the side rooms. And it was the first time I've ever been touched. And it was literally cold as dry ice. The distinct sensation of a thumb being laid on one side of my neck, and then one, two, three, 4 fingers. And then the cold going through the back of my neck.
Wow.
And I was like, well, that's a little up close and personal.
Yeah.
Um, Not sure I want to do my laundry in this room. Um, so I walk over to the doorway where they are, just in time to hear the agent say, "I don't know what this room was used for." And I walk to the doorway. One wall is all old apothecary cabinets, 7 metal sinks on the
Oh,
wall, and the largest drain in the cement floor you've ever seen. I just looked at her and
oh.
said, "I'll tell you, it was the embalming room," and turned around, and I start towards the stairs. I can still hear her stilettos chasing me down the hallway going, well, I guess I should tell you this was a mortuary in the,
Oh, so she did
20th.
know.
She did know. But
Oh.
it's not something that has to be disclosed here. You only have to disclose if if a murder took
Right,
place.
right. I know that every state and has different laws, right?
Mhm. Right.
Oh, I thought she really didn't know.
Yeah, no, she knew, but yeah, but
Okay.
generally they don't, unless you ask, they don't, they don't tell
Sure.
those things. And so we ultimately bought another house. Actually, the house I'm in, and it's a block and a half away, actually, from
I
that
was
house.
about to say you bought it.
No, but not really, not for that reason. But it's funny because that was 21 years ago, and
Okay.
I've walked, of course, walked the neighborhood in the evenings and so forth. And over time, I realized when I walked by, instinctively, I'd walk to the other side of the street, walk on the sidewalk on the other side of the street, and just realizing, you can just feel yourself being watched as you go by, and no one stays there more than a couple of years.
Oh, you beat me to my question. It was
Yeah,
like they got the revolving door of occupancy.
yeah. The people that are there now have been there the longest, and they've been there about maybe 3.5 years. And then it's funny because that experience is what prompted me to want to research, investigate, ultimately write books, et cetera, et cetera.
Uh-huh.
And one thing that I do now is I do conduct history and paranormal related tours at historic sites. And
Okay.
about 3 years ago, I was at historic opera house in the area. We were doing a tour, and on a break, um, I hear one couple talking, saying, "Oh, do you remember when so and so had that house?" And they start talking enough, I realize I think they're talking about that house. So I
Okay.
talked to them, and it was their family. Someone in their family had owned the house for two or
What a
3 years back in the
coincidence.
'70s, and had a lot of activity, and ultimately was the reason they moved. So yeah,
So, in
that
other words, nobody got spared, huh?
apparently not. I've been almost tempted to knock on the door of the people that are there now because they've lasted 3 years, but
Right.
I
And it's
haven't.
like, yeah. And the reason why I ask is that, sometimes you hear some of these houses where some families move in, they've got
Mhm.
everything happen to them, then another family moves in and nothing happens. And they're like, what?
Right.
You know,
This one apparently pretty much everyone
is
it gets
the
to
area.
them before long.
And was it empty the time that you went to see it? Was it empty or was somebody living there?
It was empty at the time. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I'm not sure
Let me
exactly
tell
how
you.
long it was empty then, but
So I guess that real estate agent was happening. You were was hoping you weren't going to catch on as to why there's a big drain with 7 sinks in a basement.
exactly,
It's
exactly.
like,
Well, and to be fair, probably most people wouldn't.
no, 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 absolutely not, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. It's hard to believe something like that, and people don't realize that this was common. Like you said, at the turn of the
Mhm.
century, where mortuaries or funeral homes, where the family sometimes even lived on the same property,
Oh yeah.
or they were in a residential area. It's not like now that there's located in the business section of town.
Mhm.
That was very
Well, and
common.
actually, in a lot of places, they still are. Actually, most of them in this part of the country are in old homes.
Right. I've seen that they've kept that.
Mhm.
But it wasn't the norm. It wasn't like people would look at and go, "Oh," it's like no.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I tell everybody, you know what? Back then, also, a lot of people would die at home. It was
Actually,
not like that.
most people did,
Mm-hmm.
particularly until about the 1920s.
Yeah,
And most funerals and waits were held at home.
yeah.
Victorian homes, one reason for the parlor, aside from being socializing, was it was for laying out the deceased, and that's where you would have your waits and funerals. And then your formal living room up front tended to be called the family room. And when you see a Victorian home, and it will have the main entrance, and then on the side, usually on the other side of the porch, there'll be another door that
Right.
goes in. That's the death door, because family would go through the death door into the living room,
Wow.
um, when you had a funeral. And then once it got to the point that funeral homes were very common, it actually was Good Housekeeping magazine that renamed the family room the living room, and we
That
gained
is so
formal.
interesting.
Yeah,
I always thought
and
of living as in living there, not. I know it now. That
because
is
they said, so basically, there was a big article that they published, and it started this trend that the family room really was not for the funerals and the dead anymore. It was for the living, so we should call it the living room. And so that's how we
wow.
got formal living rooms. And then, of course, later on, now we have family rooms that are the
Yes.
more casual room.
Right. Yeah, where everybody hangs out and watches TV. That is
Yeah,
so interesting. I never knew the origins of that.
yeah,
But you know what? I know that back then, yes, if there was a stigma attached if it was like murder. But you know how
yeah,
nowadays if people say, oh, somebody died in there, and everybody's like, no, and it was like back then that was the norm, where
yeah.
people, if they were old or they had some type of illness, they would pass away at home, and there was
Oh,
nobody thought like, oh, that somebody died there.
yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was expected. If a house was there very long, someone would have died there, because
Sure.
that's what
Mm-hmm.
happened.
Exactly. And things so when you moved into this other house, and what happened? You were like Okay, let's make sure. Was it an older home like that one?
Yes, it's a Victorian,
Okay.
and it is haunted. And I don't have any problem with that. I've dealt with hauntings before, but just having something um, very deliberately take you by the neck that could be
Yeah.
viewed as a very threatening.
Yep.
Uh,
They usually warm up to that. That was
yeah,
out the gate, and they're grabbing you by the throat. It would have been all
yeah,
downhill if you had ever moved in there.
exactly, exactly. But no, there's activity here. There's actually two different women apparitions that people see. Um, People have seen two different men. I have not seen the men, but we've had people see two different men, um, and disembodied voices at times, things like that.
Did you ever do
Um,
the history on the property?
oh yeah, it was built in 1889. It was actually built by two spinster sisters, and they lived here for about 50 years.
Oh my
And
God.
then
Yeah.
and then their niece had it, and then another family, and then an elderly couple had it for a few years, and then we bought it. So it actually hasn't
Okay.
been owned by that many people.
Right, right. I was gonna say they hang out there, so yeah. Those are
Yeah.
the usual suspects are probably
Mm.
those spinster sisters that lived there for so long.
Oh, I think sisters are here. The two men, I'm not exactly sure who they are.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah,
sometimes,
but
there's people on the periphery that they're never documented anywhere, but
hmm and
people
they may
that
be
either
connected to
work
my
there.
family somewhere too. You just don't know where they've
Sure.
come from. But
So,
it but it's
how
all
did you go from moving into a haunted house to doing?
well, and like I said, I've lived in other places that had activity, so that part didn't really bother me. But having that experience, being touched and everything, it renewed my interest that I'd always had, and
Mm-hmm.
said, okay, I really want to know more, and you know why these things happen, and you know
Okay.
figure out the puzzles if you can.
Sure. Sure. Did you because this sounds like what in that area there's a lot of older homes. I take it, right?
Well, there are. Most date to after the Civil War, because most of western and southern Missouri was burned during the Civil War. So there's very very little that
Oh,
survives
okay.
from before the war. Um, but we have, I mean, there's just a lot of history in this area, from Indian Wars to the Civil War. Very contracted guerrilla fighting. Some of the worst guerrilla fighting of the war happened here,
Okay.
and it was a mining area. This area was very prominent in the Depression for all the bank robberies and all of the gangsters,
All the what with the
like Bonnie
bootleggers and
Clyde and Pretty Boy
yeah.
Floyd and all those people. Actually, Joplin, Missouri, which is just about 10 miles from me, a little bigger town, was known as the home of American bank robbers during the 30s. So there's just been a lot of things that have happened here.
A lot of action, huh?
Hmm.
Yes. People that don't realize that
Hmm.
when during the Prohibition, man, a lot of things. It wasn't just strictly the Depression in of itself. It was the Prohibition. A lot
Hmm.
of crime and things. People got desperate. It was like,
Hmm.
yeah, a lot of and a lot of people were done away with as well. It wasn't
Well, yeah,
only
a lot of things happen. So, yeah, so that you
yes.
just have a lot of factors that kind of go into it, and uh, there tend to be quite a few haunted sites in this area. I think a lot of it has to do with geography too, because we are on a
Mm-hmm.
limestone plateau, lots of caves, lots of underground rivers and lakes, and so I think it just tends to amplify things.
Now that you said the thing about the cave, I remember I read an article, and I included in my blog, and I don't know exactly about those three little boys that disappeared in I think it was the 1960s. Um,
Yeah, I remember that story. I can't remember exactly where it happened at, but yeah.
right. I want to say it was it Hannibal or It was,
I think
those caves that were made
Kirkwood,
famous by,
yeah, Hannibal or Kirkwood, I think, yeah, somewhere up in
right.
there.
And
Yeah.
they, apparently the kids in that area would go exploring in this is like a normal thing. But I
Hmm.
think that, if I read correctly, they were doing some type of construction work on the road close by. Bottom line,
Hmm.
these kids all went, two brothers and a friend went off, and that was it. They've never,
Yep.
they've, and they mounted like a massive manhunt. Like people went in there,
Hmm.
specialized in cave. They never found anything
Oh
about
yeah,
these
I mean
kids.
there's underground tunnels in a lot of the towns around here and everything that they were used to move wagon loads of goods and that kind of thing, as well as underground tunnels to go to the brothels,
Yeah,
uh,
people don't
mining,
realize that.
mhm,
They
mine
would do,
shafts, everything.
like,
Yeah, I mean there's tunnels and everything are very common around here. They try, if there's a cave in, and because they try to keep them all blocked off anymore because people would go exploring, and they're
mm-hmm.
it is very dangerous. So those things happen, all that have happened throughout time here. Yeah. So hmm.
Right, right. That, I believe, that, the Tom Sawyer series,
Hmm.
they talked about these caves and a bunch of
Oh
stuff
yeah,
like
the Mark
that.
Twain cave. Yeah, actually,
Yes.
that's a very interesting story at Hannibal, because it's only named Mark Twain cave because after he became famous. Before that, it was the McDowell cave, after Dr. Joseph McDowell, who is a very interesting character. He was a brilliant surgeon and started the first medical school west of the Mississippi. And in the late 1830s, early 1840s, his 14-year-old daughter died. I think of typhoid. I can't remember. And he was also interested in the supernatural, but he was very interested in reanimation. And he preserved her body, and he owned what is now Mark Twain Cave, and kept her preserved in a metal casket in formaldehyde and I don't know what else, with the idea of preserving her until hopefully at some point she could be brought back to life.
Oh,
And that's just one interesting story of
let me
McDowell.
tell
So
you, that's, and what was it? Was he keeping her in the cave?
he kept her there because of the low temperatures, the stable temperatures. Yeah, because he was trying to preserve her body
Oh,
until
okay, I
because
understand.
until science
All
could
right, yeah, the
progress to the
cool
point that
temperatures, I
she could be brought
imagine,
back to life.
was he was
Yeah.
trying to preserve her body. That
Mhm.
is, and I'm still here, and I'm hoping I'm gonna come back. It's just I'm telling you, every once in a while, the internet hiccups and everything
Oh
goes with
yeah.
it. But
Yep.
anyway, there was something else that I know it's not per se and I was looking at it, I said, you know what, I gotta ask her about this.
Okay.
And this is not really a ghost. It's about a some type of, I guess it's a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch called the Blue Man.
Oh,
Have
the
you heard
Blue
of it?
Man. Yes.
Yes. What
Um,
what is that? I had never heard about. I mean, I've heard of Bigfoot, obviously, but I had never
yeah.
heard of the Blue Man.
Blue Man stories go back to the 1860s in southern Missouri and northern Arkansas, and it's basically a Sasquatch type creature that is described as having very dark brown or black fur, but with that it has a blue tint to it, in the
Okay.
light. Uh, and so they would call him the Blue Man. Um, some people there's an alternate version that one of the early witnesses had a nickname Blue. They called him Blue for some reason, and that's
Mm-hmm.
where the name came from. But witness accounts usually describe the creature as having a bluish tint to the fur when the sunlight hits it. So
Okay. And what happened? But Are you saying that it was the natives in the area had already sighted it beforehand? That like in other words, they already had a history of this creature?
Well,
Because you know how
yeah,
sometimes they'll say, well, certain of these Bigfoot versions, they'll say,
right.
well, the natives were already, had some
And
type
then
of oral
and
history
that's
about
see
it.
that's part of the thing is that some of the tribes they would move in and out, and the dominant tribes in the area did not live in this area. They lived
Mm-hmm.
further north, but they would come down to hunt. And so the area that the Blue Man is sighted in, you didn't really have permanent Indian settlements until much later, um, and during relocation times when they were moving Indian tribes west. So it's hard to know whether there were accounts or not, because some of the tribes in the area do have some cryptid stories,
Right.
whether including some that would be Sasquatch related. But whether or not we're talking about the same one is
Okay.
not real clear. And the name the Blue Man really came about in the 1860s.
Okay.
Um, and the first major case was a group of loggers were attacked by this creature, and basically came out. They were in a clearing. It comes out of the trees, has a large stick, and is attacking them, and does tree knocks and things like that. It was very
Okay.
aggressive,
Interesting.
and
Interesting.
and they get away. A couple of them were injured, but they get away, and then they report it when they get back to the nearest town. And then there's been sightings off and on up
Okay.
until
So in other
not
words,
too
this
long
was
ago. They just don't occur as often anymore.
okay. In other words, and the reason why I say is that I know that different parts of the countries have sometimes their version of Bigfoot, and they've given it
Hmm.
their own name for whatever reason.
Hmm.
And then I'm going to ask you, and because you mentioned something about weird cryptid sightings,
Hmm.
I've heard, and I don't know if this area is close to where you're at. It's what is it? It's either what is it, Land Between the Lakes, or God, shoot, I know it's in the Ozarks. I just can't remember. And I had heard, I wish I could remember right now what the particular name is. Is I know it's like in the lake area, and that they're
Hmm.
saying that in that area there's a very high that like there's a lot of sightings of different types of cryptids.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, I mean, there are. I mean, there are some that are a little more uh, folklore legend than real sightings. I mean, you have the White River monster, things like that. That
you know what? I'm
uh,
sorry. I take it back. I think it's in Kentucky. I'm sorry. I'm
okay, no,
getting
you're
that.
fine. You're fine. I mean, there's an area that's not too far from about 35 miles from me. That's just in the northeast corner of Oklahoma. And it's on tribal land. Goat Man Holler, and they have what they refer to as a goat man that is
Yes.
really a Sasquatch, but it has horns that
Okay. That's so
that
funny.
are circled like a,
Like they
a,
circle back
a
like a ram's head.
like a ram's horn, and uh, some years ago was honored with being invited out by tribal leaders um, to look at that as well as a couple of other things. But one of the more interesting stories was Goatman Hollers, and it's a very isolated area, and you have to hike a couple of miles back into it from the road.
Uh huh.
Uh, there's a stream at the bottom of the ravine. It's a very deep V ravine, and um, while we were hiking in, we were being tracked by something on the ridge. You could
Really?
hear it. You could catch a little bit of movement. Never
Oh.
could get a clear photo or anything, or see it clear enough because there was enough foliage. It was summertime, but there was something up there, and it was upright. Um, And but the tribal leaders told a story that several years before they'd been having flooding issues, and so the state had sent in the Department of Natural Resources to
Mm-hmm.
dredge the stream. And while they were down there working, um, back at their houses, they hear gunshots from that direction. So they go investigate, and they meet the workers coming out, and they describe, basically running into this goat man. And all they had with them was a 22, and they shot at it and said they got it in the shoulder, and it screamed and ran off. And they refused to come back without shotguns. So,
I bet. It's like, holy crap.
yeah,
It's like all, God, yeah. Goatman
yeah.
slash Bigfoot.
Hmm.
Wow. Um, would you say that a lot of especially I imagine I don't know, do you do any type of investigations now at all?
Yeah.
Or just,
Hmm.
okay, do you go to usually historic sites or do you actually go to residential spots?
Do both. Don't do as many private
Mm-hmm.
cases as I used to,
Okay.
just for time reasons, and just the number of things that are going on between
Yeah.
uh, producing a show and development and writing books and everything else.
Yes.
But uh, and the historic sites that we work with
Mm-hmm.
tend to be it's not overly commercialized. It's not like the destination sites like Valeska or Waverly Hills, etc.
Sure.
But we work with them for fundraising and different events and so forth.
You, you know what? I prefer these places because after a while, certain locations, historical sites,
Hmm.
everybody and their second cousin has gone, and done,
Hmm.
some type of show on it. And it's like,
Yeah,
I get it. And you already know, it's like you already know the story or who the supposed ghost star or what happened or what's
yeah,
the history, whatever. And it's like, sometimes personally, I like when you go into these locations that are not really that well known, you know,
yeah.
and that,
Yeah, and I've worked with and been on most of the big shows and everything, and so yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Actually, one of the locations I work with is actually being featured on Nick Groff's Death Walker over in the UK
mm-hmm.
right now, since Discovery's not airing it in the US yet, but in Canada and the
Right. I
UK.
know a lot of
Yeah.
these shows. What was it? I got contacted. What was it? It wasn't. It wasn't for first responders. God, I can't. No, it was. They were again the company's based out of Canada, and they're putting together a new version
Hmm.
of whatever. And I've worked with them before. I think they produced Paranormal Survivor, Haunted
Hmm.
Hospital, whatever. They were going to do something about haunted objects, and if I knew anybody, I was like, no, you know. But I know that a lot of them are first they air in Canada first, and then
Yeah.
eventually they come down here.
Well,
Um,
I mean, that doesn't not exactly how it happened there, but of course, Nick's done, he was on Ghost Adventures and Turn 'Em a Lot Down, et cetera, et cetera. But um, Discovery has the show, but they're showing in the UK and Canada at
okay.
this time. But one of the locations they featured, Kendrick House, the Civil War era house, I've
Mm-hmm.
worked with for the past 13, 14 years. So it's it's
Well,
pretty
that's what
neat.
I was going to ask you. Is there a lot of the events or hauntings that the origins are the Civil War during
Some
that
are,
time?
yeah. Some definitely are. Some are other things, or just, sometimes just tragedies that happened on site, or just,
Mm-hmm.
a family that was there for generations, and,
Okay.
you know, that energy's there. One place I work with was a family home, but, they just had a series of unfortunate deaths.
Yes.
One son was murdered, but just several untimely deaths in different ways that were natural, but ended up with a lot of activity in the home.
Right.
Basically, family's still there. So
And they're still
it could
there.
be a lot of different things. Yeah.
And what's really funny is because especially when you do research or you look, you know, there was a higher infant mortality. People just died easier. It was,
Well, yeah,
but still, there were some things with some families like, man, you all need to like do something like, because there was like, yeah, the regular tragedies that just befell people of that time period, shorter lifespan, but still, there was. It's like you guys
some just
can't
seem
catch
to
a
have
break.
more than their share.
Yeah, it was like, wow, what's going on
Yeah,
with you guys?
yeah.
Um, and it's really funny because in some areas of life they were successful,
Hmm.
but then when it came to like personal tragedies and things of this nature,
Almost because of the, sometimes because I've worked with several places that are kind of that situation, you almost think, boy, was the price of having success that you were going
right?
to have loss, I mean,
Yeah.
and a lot of those situations, it's not that they were, you can't even point to, oh, they were a bad person, or they were,
Mm-hmm.
ruthless in business or anything. A lot of them, they did a lot for the community, and there was
Yeah.
nothing out there to indicate, there was they
Like
were
you
bad
brought
in
it
any
on
way.
yourself, bad
Yeah,
karma. You were such an
exactly.
SOB that, yeah,
Yeah, and a lot of times it's not that, it's just like, man, this family just, literally worked their
right,
butts off and made something and gave back to the community, but then just had a series of tragedies happen to them. So,
right. And what's really funny is like, and I'm gonna say, one of the spouses would die, and then they would
hmm,
marry. And let's go with would marry somebody else. So let's say with the first wife dies, he marries
right.
another, but usually sometimes younger than him, and she
Yeah.
dies, and it's like, and he marries a third time, and it's like, sometimes it's like very like, man, I would have stayed away from you. I wouldn't have married you even if you would have made me $1 million. It's like, forget that. Yeah,
but
you
but
see that.
yeah. But I mean, it's just like now people, a lot of people know that situation is the next missus is looking at, oh, he has money, he's well to do,
Oh, sure.
etc. And, the others, they died of illness or whatever. I don't have anything to worry about.
Oh no, no, I don't. It's people don't realize like, back in, let's go to that time period of the Civil War, post Civil War.
Mhm.
Um, most women, it was like marriage was the end all be all in a way, and
Well,
I
it's their only
remember.
way for security, usually.
Right. And I remember, what was it? I think I was that it was a book. It was written at Devil in the White City or something. This was about
Yeah.
H. Holmes when he
Hmm.
was kidnapping and killing. And he met all
Hmm.
these women basically through personals, and they would be
Yeah.
willing to travel out there because marriage. And you think
Hmm.
about it, it's like, man, are you crazy? And
Yeah.
then you think about it, that the mindset at that time, especially as women were getting older, like as in you are already 25 and you're not married, what's wrong with you? You know,
That's right.
that like you said, hey, so he's 30 years older than me. I don't care. I'll be Mrs. So and so.
Exactly. And,
Yeah, it was a different mindset.
it really was. But then, uh, most women had very little opportunity,
Yes.
and
Mm-hmm.
so outside of marriage, most women ended up in being very, very destitute. So,
Yeah. Yes. Yes. People don't realize. I wrote a book back in 2017. It had to do with like the old west, the brothels and ghosts and all that. And contrary to what a lot of people think, a lot of women fell into either being dance hall girls or prostitutes because they got widowed and they had no
hmm,
way of making money.
hmm,
Um, or in some cases, they, same thing, but let's say they had a home and they would board out.
hmm,
Uh, and sometimes they would take in boarders like divorcees, and everything.
yeah,
And sometimes what they would even do is they weren't a full time brothel. They would only do it like on the weekends. And you
right,
look at it, and they said these women were never had never prostituted themselves or anything, but it was either that or starve. so
exactly,
so they
exactly,
was like, I gotta do it. I gotta do it because if not, you
hmm,
know, I
and
gotta I gotta eat.
exactly. And so a lot of times they had kids to take care of and everything else. So
Yep. Yes,
you know.
yes, it's incredible that there was not much, and unless you lived in one of the bigger cities where sometimes they had the factories, but if you lived a little
Mm,
bit further out in a smaller town or city, your options as far as job wise
very limited,
didn't exist,
pretty
didn't exist
much.
at
Yeah.
all. Hmm. Yeah, yeah, it's really interesting, contrary to some of the things that you think of as being um, and it's really funny because I know that they've romanticized some of the old
Mm,
west, and you think it's all these beautiful young dance hall girls, and it's like, nah, you'd be surprised, it
most
was
of them
totally,
were. Yeah.
yeah, they were not. It's yeah, it's a very, and by the way, I'm by this I'm not saying but some of them that actually didn't get killed by venereal diseases became opened up their own brothels, and
Hmm.
sometimes they died tragically, but
Yep.
they did more than survive. In other words,
Yeah.
they
Well,
they
it's like any time you have to figure out how to survive the circumstances that you're living in.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yep. Whatever it takes. Sometimes that's the people.
Mm,
And I guess what I'm saying is sometimes we look at it through our modern day sensibilities,
exactly.
thinking, "How could she?" And it's like, yeah, go back a
You,
hundred years.
you have I always say, one, history is messy, and we see a lot of this going on right now with people wanting to revise history and not
Oh
talk
God.
about this and that. And history is messy, and it's not there to make anyone feel good or
Mm-hmm.
bad.
Right. It was
And
what it was. It's just
it
what it
was what it
was.
was. And if you don't if you if people don't learn about things just like that, having that empathy and context, you know, the cliche is it's going to be repeated. It will be repeated in some way because
Mm-hmm.
you aren't learning the lessons. I mean, that's why we used to, we grew up hearing fairy tales and everything were
Sure.
cautionary tales to teach you things. And learning from the good things and the mistakes of people in the past is no different.
Of course. And I tell everybody when I did that research, they said, the no matter what you had done, as let's say we're going with the if you put on the marriage label, that's it. You were respectable again, and it was impolite
Mhm.
to ask about your past.
Right?
So because this is what it was, and I tell everybody, everybody looks at that, that Wyatt Earp movie Tombstone, and another one Wyatt
Uh-huh.
Earp that they came out. All three of Wyatt Earp's wives, if you want to call them that, were all ex prostitutes.
Well,
Okay.
except for his first wife.
Right, exactly. Except for the first wife that died from, what was it, typhoid? I think it was that she died.
Well, she died in childbirth,
Right.
and
Well,
actually that happened about 20 miles from my house.
really, okay. But she was, because his family, they were, and then he kind of like went downhill, and he just went
Well,
off and did
actually,
stupid stuff.
he ran out. He left town because he had
Didn't he
warrants
steal a
for his
horse or
arrest for
something like that?
embezzling as the city marshal. Yeah, and for horse thievery.
Right. But he was an up and coming young man, and then life went
Hmm.
sideways. But then when he went out there, he had a first, because back then they would say wife, but it was really more like a common
Hmm.
law wife. But the first one, the second one, the one that they
Yeah,
portray in the movies, that she was a
the first one. They were married. They were married.
right.
Yeah,
No, it
yeah,
was, and but she died like, what was it, within the first year of marriage or very shortly they
yeah.
were.
She died in childbirth. She'd gotten sick and then died in childbirth,
Right.
and then it went downhill. And then he kind of reinvented himself. Then that's when he went into gambling. I mean, he played both sides, and that was very common.
Mm-hmm.
Is that you'd have gamblers and grifters, and then sometimes they were on that side of the fence, and other times they were lawmen. And
Well,
even
I
after Tombstone, I mean, even after all the Tombstone and all that, he ended up in Hot Springs, Arkansas, several years later, and got ran out of town by the sheriff for a gambling
yeah.
operation he was running. So,
Yeah. Well, what people don't realize is that when you had these towns that sprung up because they were at the end of a cattle drive or they were mining towns, you had
mhm.
a lot of very rough characters in there.
Yep,
So sometimes nobody wanted the job of the lawman. So
exactly.
some of these mayors, the people, the the couple of important people in the town, they would have to hire a
Yeah.
gunslinger ex, like you said, on the wrong side of the law, because
Right.
the only one willing to take the job and that could handle the crowd that would come to these
Exactly.
places. So yeah, yes, you're right. One day you could be the lawman, the next day you're a gunslinger, and then you could flip flop.
Hmm.
He even his last wife, that they were married for so many years.
Hmm.
Um, he from what I understand, he died. He was a little bit older than her, but he died first. But
Hmm.
she had a gambling habit,
Yeah.
and basically when she died, if it wasn't for like his friends and stuff that basically paid so that she could get buried, she
Yeah.
would have probably ended up in a pauper's grave.
Hmm.
So, but they tend sometimes, like you said, to romanticize what was going on back then,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
that
yeah.
wasn't the case. And sometimes reality is much better. I hate to say it,
Hmm.
than anything else, but yeah, he was. I do have to give him that. He led a very adventurous life all the way to the end.
He did. And actually this is a little good segue into the Dark Ozarks project. Um, we started it basically highlighting the dark history of the Ozarks region. And
Okay.
what a lot of people don't realize is virtually everything in the Americana mythos of the Old West, etc., that we think of, Tombstone,
Mm-hmm.
Deadwood, all of these things, um, even cattle drives, the Texas cattle drives, they didn't. Those things did not come first. All of those things came first in the Ozarks. Um,
Okay.
the first and pretty much only call out, walk down gunfight that ever happened in reality happened in Springfield, Missouri in 1865 with Wild Bill Hickok and Dave Tutt. Um, what we see in the movies really never happened.
Okay. Yeah, which is
Um, and so we cover all of these dark events in history, legends, mysteries, supernatural events, etc., and all the different connections between them.
yeah. And I tell people back then, people don't realize that people, those that feud or revenge.
Hmm.
Man, you could go years, and if somebody was out, like you killed their brother, their friend, or even you did something, they would
Hmm.
get you. It would be a couple of years later. They wouldn't forget. They
Well,
when you least
honor
expected
culture.
it.
It was the honor culture. It really came uh, from the Scotch Irish who settled Appalachia and through here, and then went on west. So many of them, um, and so honor. The concept of honor culture affected so many things, and it resulted in those kind of things happening a lot.
Right, where people wouldn't be. It was like that bygone, like bygones, like no, that didn't exist. And well,
No.
as a matter of fact, what happened with Hickok when he got shot in Deadwood, I believe it was something that had happened behind, because he was another one that at one point he was a lawman, and then he ended up.
I he would meander. I mean, he started out in the Civil War. He was a Union Scout,
Mm-hmm.
and the shootout was actually you know made for a movie. It was over a card game, a girl, and a pocket
Right.
watch, and he had lost money to Dave Tutt, and they were best friends. Actually, they had fought on
Mm-hmm.
opposite sides of the war, but they were best friends, and they um, they were kind of feuding over a girl, and Tutt had won a fairly large sum at the card game, and Hickok couldn't pay up right then, and so Hickok had his pocket watch laying on the table, and it was his father's watch, and Tuck took it and told him he was going to hold it until he could pay him. And he told him,
Okay.
don't wear that in public, because if people saw him wearing Hickok's watch, it would,
Right. Yeah.
cause
It's like.
gossip. So, which that kind of threw the gauntlet down because if he didn't wear the watch, everyone that saw this happen would say that he was a coward. And so he ended up wearing the watch. Hickok calls him out on it. They meet on the square, and they both shot same time, and Tut missed, and Hickok shot him through the heart, and Dave ran to the steps of the courthouse. He was standing in front of the courthouse and said, "Boys, I'm dead," and falls over dead. And and basically then a Harper's Weekly reporter ends up in town not long after, and Hickok tells a story, and it's written, and he becomes the first basically celebrity of the Old West. And but it could have gone down either way, to be honest. They both were dangerous men with a gun, and it could have gone either way. Hickok could have been consigned to oblivion, and we not know his name if the shot had gone different.
Exactly. It's like,
Mhm.
and what was it I heard? What was it that I can't remember what Bill Hickok, if he had some type of presentiment or somebody had told him that he was going to die soon when he went off to Deadwood, because I think he had just gotten remarried or something, and he was going into that gambling thing.
Yeah,
Somewhere to
I
make
mean, well,
money.
he'd been a gambler in pretty much off and on his entire career, and he had stopped being a lawman because uh, he ended up someone getting shot that he didn't intend to kill, and he just got to the point he didn't want to do it anymore. But he was cautious. He didn't want to ever sit with his back to the door because he had enemies, and he was
Sure.
the biggest celebrity of the Old West at that point. So everyone was gunning for him.
Right,
So
yeah. I want to be
he
the one to take him out.
yeah, I'll be famous because I take out Wild Bill. And when he sat down at the game, the only chair open had its back to the door, and he asked someone to change chairs with him, and the guy refused. Hickok
Wow.
sat down at the game anyway, and the guy walked in and killed him. So
Isn't it funny sometimes how things pivot on that one
one
occurrence?
little thing, yeah.
One little thing, if it were a guy, it's
If they
incredible how
changed chairs, it
sometimes,
probably never would have happened. Yeah,
yeah, and then for all you know, he would have died an old man in his 80s,
exactly.
because that, he dodged that bullet.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of, personally, I think the real stories, the historical perspective, like you said, of these characters, you
Hmm.
know, regardless of whether they're part of a haunted place or anything, I think it's much more interesting than the glamorized, romanticized versions that they want to give out.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I do too. I mean, and you can learn more from it, and I mean, honestly, you can identify more with it because they're
mhm.
real people, and they have good points and bad points, and if you know the real stories, a lot of times you can kind of put yourself in their spot and
Sure.
understand why they got where they were or why they did
Hmm.
what they did, you
Sure.
know.
Because
Um,
some of these people, even when people would homestead and move out, like,
mhm.
and everybody here is so used to dialing 911 and you get help. And when you moved out there, you were on your own. You were lucky if you
You
had a
were.
doctor in the nearest town.
Yeah, most
Otherwise,
places didn't.
no, they didn't. They didn't.
No.
So people survived, and but it made for a lot of strong characters. Some worse than others in some cases, but I think it's so interesting. You've done. Is there any place specifically that you've been to recently, as far as historical spot?
Oh, well, I had quite a few. Well, I'd say, well, one of my favorites, and actually we're going to have an event there in April, is in Newtonia, Missouri, the Ritchie Mansion, and it's a Civil War home. Actually, two battles happened on their front yard, so in the Civil War. Um, it's just a fascinating place with a lot of activity. In
Okay.
March 12th. we are actually going to have an all-day event at the Coleman Theater in Miami, Oklahoma, which is it's really interesting because it's the site of the first jail in the county from the 1840s. There other buildings were on site, burned down, including a funeral home. The Coleman itself is probably the most gorgeous building within 500 miles, I can easily say.
Okay.
Mr. Coleman made a fortune in the oil fields in Oklahoma, and actually lived in California as well. His son was best friends with Bing Crosby, if that gives you an idea. And but they lived here, and his wife would get bored, so among his other business interests, he decided to build the theater, and the inside of the theater is based on Versailles.
Wow. That must be
Yeah,
beautiful.
it's absolutely gorgeous.
So Lisa, if anybody wanted to know what events that are coming up, what website would they go to? If
They can go to paranormalsciencelab.com. That's my team page. If you go on Facebook, you can look at the Paranormal Science Lab page or the Dark Ozarks page. If you're interested
Okay.
in dark history and legends, check out the Dark Ozarks page on Facebook. There's a series of videos on there as well as on YouTube that my co-producer and I sit down every week and talk about different topics, and then we have all kinds of different information on the page. So,
Let me ask you, have you ever done any research into, I want to call it, you know how you hear some stories and, nobody really believes it, or it's like
mhm.
hearsay, and then when you do it, when you've gone into investigating or researching it, it turns out to be accurate. Have you ever come across that? Something that
um,
people thought was just too dark maybe, or too over the top.
well, there are some stories like that, that on first blush, people would, if they aren't familiar with it, they would think it was not true.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I find, like you said earlier, though, that a lot of the situations that the legends and the urban legends are manufactured, and then you find out the truth, and then sometimes they're
Right.
more interesting. Um,
Absolutely.
but one of sort of those sort of off the wall or out there things is that there's a ghost light, earth light that's not far from here. That's it's called the spook light, that has been documented by natives for hundreds of years, and was documented on the Trail of Tears, etc. And it's still there, and no one can figure out what it is. The
Really.
Corps of Engineers has been down, the Army has studied at various universities, and they usually default, well, maybe it's swamp gas or something like that, and it's like, well, there's no marshy area within
To
50
produce
miles.
that. Yeah, it's like
Basically,
try again.
yeah,
Think of something else.
yeah, or headlights from the road, from the highway 15 miles away, except for it's been documented for over 200 years, and it can be seen all directions over several square miles, but we'll go with that.
What was it originally that they were saying that it was when it was like originally cited? What
Well,
were they?
they just that it's a ball of light that
Mm-hmm.
is seen, and it will sometimes it goes through the field, sometimes through the trees, sometimes it's about 5 feet off the ground, sometimes it's higher up, um, and different legends did grow up. Uh, One, was the perennial suicidal Indian princess story that is all
Okay,
over the
okay,
country.
okay. Yeah, that's
Um,
what I mean. I know that before it ever
yeah,
got to swamp gas, they would attach
yeah.
some story to it.
One version is that it was a farmer during the Civil War. His children
Okay,
disappeared, and he went out looking for him, and it's the
okay.
lantern, that kind of thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but to be perfectly honest, so many people locally, thousands of people have seen it.
Right.
It just for years and years, um, that most people don't view it that way. They view it as it is a ball of light or plasma or something, but we just
Right,
don't.
right.
Yeah.
And nobody can explain it though. That is so
Mm-mm.
interesting.
Yeah. It
Especially
is.
when you have all these attempts at the science. Don't get. I'm a
Yeah,
friend of science. I know people are going.
me
I'm a
too.
friend of
Me too.
science. I don't have a problem with science. But when other scientists try to explain and they just like mumble and walk away and it must be whatever. Okay, yeah, okay. You don't know what it is either.
Yeah, exactly. And so but it's definitely interesting. And there's other phenomena that happen in the area too. I mean, people see shadow people. One of the
Oh,
strangest things I had experience years ago down there. There were 4 or 5 of us there had gone down, and we'd come in one car, and we'd walked down far enough down the road that a couple of them decided we'll go back and get the car and bring it up. So 3 of us are standing there, and while we're standing on the side of the road, and all of a sudden we hear a pack of coyotes, what sounds like a pack of coyotes, running towards us from the other side of the road. And they keep it. I mean, you can hear them running, you can hear them yipping, and they keep coming, and they don't veer off one way or the other, which normally they would. And a lot of times, as they approach people, they will get quiet.
mm-hmm.
That didn't happen, and you hear them go past us on both sides and go on through, but they never slow down, as if they went straight through the fences on either side of the road and the trees, etc.
Uh huh.
And literally that happened, and we, all three just kind of look at each other and say, like, did that just happen?
Okay.
Um, and I had not heard of anyone having that experience, but then over the years, I've had 3 or 4 different people come to me at different events and so forth and tell me they had similar experiences down there.
Really?
So phantom coyotes that.
I was about to say because for a minute there, I thought I was gonna say like real coyotes, like something was
I
chasing
mean, yeah,
them. You
well, yeah, I
know?
mean, well, I wouldn't say chasing. I'd say, it sounded like a pack of coyotes running on the hunt.
Right, right.
Uh,
But enough that they like weren't stopping for anything. Yeah.
no, yeah, like they were running as if there was nothing in their way, that there was, no barbed wire
But all you
fence,
had was the
road trees.
auditory.
Yeah, but we
That
all
is
three
so
heard it,
weird.
go past us, and it just sounded like they were all around us going past us. Yeah.
That is that's unusual. That's very
Yeah.
unusual.
hmm So there's other things that happen right down there too. So it's a very interesting place.
I bet. Because I was gonna say, sometimes you have these little areas where you have all these phenomena, whether it's UFO
Mhm.
sightings or just weird anomalies, or what you said, these auditory
Uh,
things that nobody can really explain, and the lights, and sometimes they seem to be centered around a certain area
hmm
where it's like everything's just a little bit off.
Yeah. And this is one
And
that you can't really point to anything and say, this is why I think
that's
it is.
that is so interesting.
Uh-huh.
Lisa, I want to thank you. It's been absolutely wonderful to speak to you. That's so
Oh,
interesting.
I've really
And
enjoyed it.
no, and like I said, I will put a link in the credits of the show
Thank
for
you.
anybody that wants to visit your website. And if you have any events coming up, they can go there. And I guess you post everything as far as any
Yep.
upcoming events, right?
Yep.
Which is great because this is why wait till Halloween, man? I'm telling you, I'm into one of these like it's Paranormal 365.
Yep.
This is, don't wait till Halloween or to, some of these places, they get overbooked. Do it now. It's like
Do it now. And
go
usually
ghost
you have a
hunting
better
now.
time.
Of
Usually
course.
you have a better time when it's not October
Right,
because it's not so
exactly.
crowded.
Exactly. This is the time to do it. So again, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure to speak to you.
Well, it's been my pleasure as well, and thank you very much.
You're welcome. Take care.
You too.
Wow. This was great. See? God, I could talk to her for a while. I bet she has a lot of great stories. Oh, Marlene, I'm such a sucker for a story. Well, anyway, guys, like one of those things, now, after the end of this, you're going to hear me do my supernatural central thing. And it's a weird timing thing today. But anyway, I hope you like it. It's a couple of unusual news articles about paranormal weird stuff. Why not, huh? So again, guys, please come back every week. I have a lot of interesting guests, new ones that are coming back again, talking about different things. You know, a lot of them during all this time that there was nothing else to do, they wrote books. They did a lot of research, a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. Like I said, I'm bringing on guests that I've never had on before. Um, and go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com or MarlenePardo.com or MPPellicer.com. On there, I have links to any of the videos, okay? Whether it's on YouTube, on Rumble, on BitChute, on Steemit. I've got video versions. I've got links to any of the video sites. I've got links there to any of the podcast platforms, whatever your preference is. And like I've said before in other shows, if you want to listen to any of the podcast versions of any of the episodes without commercial interruptions, I've got a link there where you could listen. I host a podcast version where you could listen to it on the browser or download the MP3 file. No cost, no commercial interruptions. Just go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com. And again, I'm working on a book three of the Sybil Chronicles, but I've put 2 novellas, so it's really the 5th in that universe. I'm hoping to have it out by April. So if you're into dark, supernatural, fantasy, I've got the book for you. I think you're going to really like it. And like I said, even though this is the 5th book for that character or that universe, the Sybil universe, you can read the book freestanding without having read the others. And you're not going to be like, huh? You know, because I know some series, like if you don't read it from the beginning, you kind of like are really lost. And I try very hard not to do that. And even when I do bring in a character or something from a prior book, I try to reference it so that whoever's reading it will understand it. So, please come back. Don't forget to subscribe to my newsletter. On there, I will release just weird articles about different things. I also put on their podcast version of the different episodes. If you're into scary stories, I have Supernatural Storytime, which you can go to supernaturalstorytime.com. And I just have about maybe 30 minutes worth of weird, just little stories about experiences that people have. Ghost encounters, creepy woods, stuff like that. I even have one version of it. It's called Stories to Listen to When You Drive, that kind of thing. I also have nightshadediary.com. There I narrate classic horror adventure type of stories. Really interested H.P. Lovecraft. I've done some early Anne Rice. A lot of the occult detective stories that were penned during the 1920s, the 1930s, Auguste Derleth, you name it. If these guys were writing for one of the pulp fiction magazines, I'm probably narrating one of their stories. I'm a big fan of theirs. Plus, of course, going into all the English authors like, God, all of them. And then, usually turn of the century, M.R. James, anybody that wrote worthwhile. And by the way, I found that a lot of lady authors from that time wrote great ghost stories. Fantastic ghost stories. I narrate them all. So if that's your thing, baby, go to nightshadediary.com. Again, I want to thank you so very much for being part of my audience, and I look forward to everybody. It's Marlene with Stories of the Supernatural. And as promised, this is going to be the first mini episode of what I'm calling Supernatural Central, which is short video about weird and unusual things that are happening out there in the world. And the reason why I decided to do this is that sometimes we have so much going on in our world, which is kind of like very troublesome, ugly stuff to worry about, that it's like, let's look at some other news that at least, what's the worst? It's going to make you laugh, or you're going to go, really? Or whatever. Just a little alternative, just to shift our focus off of things that sometimes might feel overwhelming. Just to remind us that life is still going on. Other things are going on, even if they're on the periphery. But let's get going on, and I want your feedback on what you guys think about this. And please bear with me as I'm learning to share my screen. All right, let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay, all right. Now, the first story that we've got, this is from Lon Strickler's Phantom and Monsters. This is from his blog. By the way, he's been on the show a few times. He's great. This guy he's been around for so long, and he has heard, he gets a lot of people that write to him about different stories, encounters. But anyway, let's look at this one, which it's titled "The Glimmer Man Entity Encountered at Abandoned United States Air Force Radar Station." All right, and I guess this is kind of what's left on there. It says the witness and his friend were exploring the abandoned Brookfield United States Air Force Station in Ohio when they encountered an unknown beeping and an aggressive glimmer man entity. The witness, Joseph, claims that sometime in November 2002, well, 20 years, he and a friend decided to head to the abandoned Brookfield Air Force Station located near Brookfield, Ohio. It had been abandoned since around 1986 after previously being a nursing home. There were about 30 empty buildings on 10 acres of land surrounded by overgrown vegetation and a barbed wire fence. Police regularly patrolled the area to keep out vandals, though many of the locals, like Joseph, spent much of their youth roaming around the old base. Joseph believes he had been there more than 100 times. As an adult, Joseph still liked to go up to the area occasionally and shoot guns, hike, etc. The base was about a tenth of a mile from his home through the woods. There was a hole cut in the fence which allowed easy access to the property. On that chilly November 2002 day, Joseph and his old friend Tori decided to head to the base to do some shooting. Only Joseph was armed. There was light snow on the ground as they made their way through the woods, following a deer path to the wire fence. Joseph noted that it was unusually quiet that day, walking in the woods. No sounds of animals, no wind, no nothing. At the time, he didn't think much of it, but looking back, he believes that it was strange enough that he remembered it. After finding and crawling through the hole, they eventually made their way onto the base, walking through knee-deep grass. Then they come to the beeping sound. As they walked towards the buildings, they began to hear beeping sounds, which they found to be odd given that the buildings hadn't had power since the late 1980s. As they got within 5 feet of the building, the beeps increased and became louder. They eventually made their way through an open garage bay door, and this is when the beeping went crazy. Think a metal detector zeroing in on metal. Tori became frightened. Joseph noticed that there were 2 doors leading into rooms, one of which was closed. He found this odd because every other time he had come up, the doors were open. The beeping was coming from the room with the door closed, so despite Tori's misgivings, Joseph kicked open the door and entered. The beep slowly faded out, replaced by a loud droning noise. He noticed a device sitting on the floor about 3 feet away. Initially, he thought it was a pipe bomb. He thought he was going to die. It looked like an air compressor with wires on its left side going into a rectangular black box with a cylinder attached to it. I have no idea what it was, Joseph recalled. He wondered if the police or maybe the Marines who occasionally trained on the base had put it there. Tori was frightened and insisted that they leave. Joseph also shared that feeling. They decided to head back to the fence and get out of there. As they made their way through the tall grass, things got very quiet. They both stopped, sensing that they were being watched. All of a sudden, they could hear footsteps coming through the overgrown brush. That is when they noticed across the field that snow was bouncing up and the grass bushes were parting as if something was going through the grass, something they couldn't see. It was the weirdest thing, Joseph said. Joseph could see the outline of what appeared to be a human, but it was transparent. He could see through it. He could see the brush on the other side of it, but it was distorted, like an optical illusion. Both men became frightened and headed for the fence. Joseph and Tori both kept an eye on it as they moved. They noted that there were clear indentations in the snow and the brush, and snow were moving as if somebody was trudging through the grass, but they couldn't see anything beyond an outline. Even stranger, Joseph claimed that it seemed to completely vanish occasionally and then come back. It trailed them but never got more than 30 feet away from them, except when they neared the fence. At some point, Joseph stopped and raised his rifle at the thing. This seemed to anger the entity. There was some brush that stood about 15 feet high and it separated, like somebody drove a truck through it. It was coming hard. Snow was flying. Brush was flying. Joseph aimed at it, but for the first time ever as a hunter, he felt a real sense of dread, like he should not shoot at it. His friend Tori also urged him not to shoot, as it would only make it worse. They eventually found the hole, and by this time it was full sprinting at them. The two men rushed through and into the woods, keeping their eyes on the semi-invisible entity. Joseph noticed that it had stopped at the fence. It was almost as if it wasn't allowed to leave, and it was gone like it evaporated. 3 weeks later, Joseph returned with another friend, and they spent hours searching through every abandoned building and never found the beeping device, nor did they ever encounter the entity again. Looking back, Joseph senses that the thing he encountered was something evil, and that it meant to do them harm. He likened his sighting to the Alien and the Predator films, but noted that while similar, it wasn't the same. In the comments section of the video is a post from a person named Ian Billen, which seemed to back up some of Joseph's claims. Quote, excellent to hear because I'm very familiar with a radar base in Brookfield, Ohio. My grandmother lived in the woods right behind it on Stewart Road. As kids, we would journey there from time to time through the woods on a special secret hike. We would get in through a hole in the fence in the woods. In a word, eerie. I'm familiar with the beep and the garage. My cousin John and I heard the beep, but we never knew where it would come from. The beeps did not speed up, just loud beeps spaced a few seconds apart from somewhere. There was definitely something going on there. After it had closed as a nursing home, there was still mail being delivered and collected regularly. Fire hydrants were still being kept up to date. Telephones were still on and ringing. Dogs were kept in select areas inside locked, abandoned buildings. This was many years after it had closed, and not a soul was around. However, you always felt as if you were being watched. At times the police would show up, and being as we were kids, we would take off. How would they know we were there? There was definitely something governmental/UFO always surrounding this place well before the famous UFO incident. Reference 1994, the Trumbull County, Ohio UFO incident. And at times, ghost-like things occurred that is too long to type here. We would hear sudden loud, unexplained things, banging noises right within our vicinity that we could not determine if it was a person on the next floor who should not be there and that we didn't see, or the grounds that were haunted. We would also hear things in buildings, etc. And this place is in the middle of nowhere, no houses or people in sight, and it is fenced off way back off Route 7. The UFO incident simply sealed off the deal for us. Awesome to hear this because the few folks who lived right around the area always suspected something just had to be up with the radar base. Wow. And you know what's really interesting about this? Even before it got to that part about the predator, that's exactly what I was thinking when it's describing it. I was like, wow, that sounds like the creature in the Predator, especially in the first one, which is really when they introduced that Predator creature, where it was basically camouflaging itself, whether it was bending light or something so that you couldn't see it. And I was thinking, and then at the end, even though he says it was different, but that's exactly what I was thinking. And also another thing, you're thinking, wow, this place used to be a nursing home. That's weird. An Air Force base that they turned into a nursing home. But then after they close it as a nursing home, there's still some type of activity or governmental activity going on. And then you think, well, you know what? Maybe they decided to go underground with whatever research. What better cover than to make it, on the surface at least, a nursing home? Lots of older people. They're not kids going to run around and get into what they shouldn't. Perfect place to basically, do weird scientific research, as in the government. And just, hey. And if any old person ever saw anything, they would say, oh my God, that poor old lady, that poor old man. They just imagine something. Yeah, we need to up their medication. Kind of. Let's see. Let me see which one is the next one. That was pretty long. I didn't realize it was going to be that long. But let's see. Share. Let's see which one's the next one we're going to look at. Oh, okay. This one, I remember, was way out there. Okay. This is unusual, to say the least. It's a a person that claimed to have a sighting of Goat Man or Goat Thing or Goat whatever. Um, and it appeared in the Coast to Coast in their article section, but they picked it up off somewhere else. But anyway, this is what it's saying. A British motorist was left scratching their head when a mysterious bipedal creature that they likened to a goat man dashed across the road in front of their car, recounting the bizarre encounter on a parenting forum. That's okay. The bewildered witness explained that the incident unfolded at about 2 a.m. this past Sunday morning as they were driving near the community of Staverton. Okay, this had to be recent because this was posted yesterday, so it was happened like a week ago. The trip took a decidedly strange turn, they said, when something crossed the road in front of us in full headlights for about 3 seconds and made a distinct impression on the mystified motorist. Getting a fairly good look at the oddity, the witness described it as being about the height of a person, maybe 6 feet or over, and noted that it had short, powerful legs and hips, which seemed to move in a circular, fluid fashion. The motorist went on to say that it was not a deer because it stood on 2 legs, and also dismissed the suggestion that the creature could have been a kangaroo, as it was much taller and upright when moving. Later observing that it was somewhat similar to a gigantic hare, but far too large for that to be the case, the driver mused, the closest we can describe is a large man goat on hind legs, but really stocky ones. Pan? Oh. Other members of the forum posited that perhaps the motorist encountered a Bigfoot or even the devil out for a late night stroll. But the witness was skeptical about such fantastic possibilities. Despite likening the creature to a man-goat, the driver declared that it was not a kangaroo, goat man, slender man, or Sasquatch. These things don't exist. As such, the motorist ultimately conceded that they may have to settle on the possibility that they spotted a startled mangy deer, since nothing so far really fits the bill, and the alternative answers might be a bit too unsettling to consider. I don't know. You know what? That's a weird thing to post on a parenting forum. Here, you're parenting, you're talking about, school or things for your kids or this newest game or whatever. And oh, by the way, I'm going home at 2 a.m. and a goat man. I think I saw a goat man. Okay, what can I say? That's a little bit. I bet it got everybody's attention. I'll tell you that much. It's like, okay. Let's see. Let's go on to the next one, which is, I'm telling you, that is, oh, this was interesting. This was an article that appeared in Live Science. It came out in a couple of months ago, well, October of 2021. It's still recent. And basically what it's saying is that the spirit mirror used by 16th century occultist John Dee came from the Aztec Empire. And for anybody that is familiar with John Dee, he was in the court of Elizabeth I. And let's go on. It says here, the 16th century courtier John Dee, a scientific advisor to England's Queen Elizabeth I, was also deeply involved in magic and the occult, and he tried to commune with ghosts using a so-called spirit mirror made of polished obsidian. Now a new analysis of Dee's infamous mirror has finally traced its origins, not to the spirit world, but to the Aztec Empire. Obsidian mirrors such as these were known from Aztec culture, but there were no records on this mirror's origin. However, geochemical analysis enabled researchers to link the mirror's obsidian. Hold on a minute. Okay, a type of volcanic glass to Pachuca, Mexico, a popular source of obsidian for Aztec people. This finding indicated that the artifact was Aztec and not a copy made from European obsidian, and Dee likely acquired the mirror after it was brought to Europe from Mexico, according to a new study. Though Dee was a scientist and mathematician, his interest also swung towards the magical and mystical, and in addition to the spirit mirror, he owned other objects related to astrology, divination, alchemy, and the exploration of demonic magic. Scientists reported October 7th in the journal Antiquity. Dee claimed that one of these objects, a purple crystal on a chain, was given to him by the archangel Uriel. along with instructions for making a philosopher's stone, the mythical alchemical marvel that promised the gift of eternal life and the ability to turn base metals into gold, according to the Royal College of Physicians in London. Dee also possessed a black glass mirror kept in a sharkskin case, which he used for peering into the future, according to the RCP. I believe that they also refer to it as scrying. Even you can scry also into water, but with a dark, over dark interior. Dee's obsidian mirror, now with a collection of the British Museum in London, is polished on both sides and is nearly perfectly circular, measuring about 7.2 inches or 18.5 centimeters in diameter and 0.5 inches or 13 millimeters thick and weighing about 31 ounces. A perforated square tab at the top of the mirror measures about, 1.3? Oh my God. Wait a minute. Hold on. Wait.